So today we were talking with Lora Poepping, founder, owner, and goddess of Plum Coaching and Consulting based out of Seattle, Washington. And Plum actually has clients from all over the world. And our discussion with Lora today will be focusing on the value of a great LinkedIn profile.
This is The Career Cue, a podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Stacey Harris.
So welcome to the show, Lora.
It is so great to be here.
It's really fun.
It's so great to see you, and I'm honored to be here.
That's great.
Thank you.
So let's get things started. I think most people have heard of LinkedIn, but I think there's still a lot of question about what it means to utilize LinkedIn and why having a good LinkedIn profile is so important. So do you have any kind of tips for listeners on why that should be kind of a priority when it comes to their job search?
Sure. Well, first, let me just tell you that LinkedIn isn't necessarily for everyone. So my own father asked me, do I need a LinkedIn profile? And he's in his 80s. He's retired. And I said, certainly he's very technical. And I said, you can certainly play around with it. But there really isn't truly a reason for him to have LinkedIn. If you aren't necessarily, for example, if you're not looking for a job or you are doing something on your own. Let's say you own a horse ranch, and you are not necessarily trying to generate more connections for your horse ranch, although I will say LinkedIn is a great business development tool. So let me just preface it by people shouldn't be freaking out saying, I've got to have a LinkedIn profile. But the value of LinkedIn is I could wax on and on about a great profile and what LinkedIn means, both for you as a candidate or you as a professional or you as a business owner or you as a recruiter. There are so many values to LinkedIn, and I love to sing or be the Pied Piper of LinkedIn. So I'm so glad to have this opportunity. So the first thing is really understand whether you do need a LinkedIn profile. That'd be the first thing I would really think about. Do you really need one? The second is, if I do need one, what is the intent? A lot of people think I need a profile, but they don't really think very deliberately or thoughtfully about what should be the reason to have one. So if it's for job search, you're going to be doing some things prior to putting that LinkedIn profile out there, and I'll talk about that in a little while. And if it is truly to build business, then there's a whole different way to go about building a profile. So really understanding your intent is one of the very first things you should do.
So the why you're doing it.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. That's awesome. And so So once someone has gone through the why, whether it be job search or business development, what are some of the key elements? And it probably does depend on what that why is, right, or what the intent is. So let's focus on the job search piece for the purpose of this conversation. But so what would be some of the key elements that would make a good profile for someone that's in the position of a job search?
Absolutely. Well, remember how I said there's some pre-work that you have to do. So I'm going to just talk about that and how that sets a great foundation for what you put on top of it. So if you know you're going to be doing a job search, you need to understand what the marketplace wants. So if you've been in video production or audio production and you're very used to what's needed in that industry, then you understand what the vernacular, the language is of that industry, and you're going to know that what hiring managers are looking for, and you're going to be able to articulate your message that's going to appeal to the hiring manager. If you're still a little bit uncertain about what it is you want to go into, one of the things you need to know is that you should do a little bit of research about what the marketplace says it wants, what is the language of every kind of position you're interested in, and you want to integrate that language into your LinkedIn profile. Okay. So I'm going to start with that. But after you've identified those types of positions that are interesting to you and you've understood what the vernacular is and you know what you need to integrate into your messaging, there are very key elements that you need in your profile. The first is I'm going to start at the top of the page if we were looking at a LinkedIn profile right now. Number one, you should have a really strong, what we call header. That is what typically pops up if you're not familiar with editing your own header. It's what typically defaults to your most recent job. So if I were to look at my most recent job, which is being the president of Plum, it would say President Plum Coaching and Consulting. But actually, that is completely, you can edit it. And so you can write whatever it is that you want to say. So I often tell my clients, it isn't just what you are, it's what you want to do. So I had a client who was really interested after many years in childcare services in being in culinary because she had some experience with the childcare in culinary. So we came up with a header that said education, culinary, food services. I can't remember exactly what it said. But what we were doing is trying to tell anyone who would look at her profile that she isn't just childcare.
Right.
She actually has this culinary interest and dietary. That's what the other thing. So there's the header. And I personally believe in the religion of all capital letters. And so your header should have all caps. The second thing is you should have a really solid photo of yourself. You don't have to go to a professional photographer, although I have a list and I love them and I think they're great. And my own profile picture was done by a professional photographer. But I think that investing in a great photo is really important. And I wrote myself some notes today, so I just want to remind people that you shouldn't have your dog in the photo. It should not be a mugshot. And your kids should not be in the photo. And all these things I have personally seen in the photo. And I think you have too. Actually, my favorite photo of all time was a recruiter whose dog was licking her face. That was so incredibly unprofessional. And this is a professional medium, so you should not have unprofessional there shouldn't be an unprofessional look in your picture.
Yeah. And LinkedIn is different from Facebook.
Absolutely.
If you want that shot with the dog licking your face, Facebook is the right platform for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. That 100%. The other thing is that you want to make sure that you have a solid summary. So a lot of LinkedIn profiles I look at, I see this opportunity that is lost. If you don't have a summary that identifies your background, how many years you were in it, and by the way, hint, hint, the more numerals and the more symbols, the more the eye is attracted to it. So someone is going to typically review your resume or your LinkedIn profile in approximately 6 seconds. So that's why that header is so important, that photo is so important, and your summary for us older people in the audience is the Cliff's Notes version of your background. It should also have bulleted words in it that pertain to your industry. So if you were in culinary, you might say dietary, culinary, nutrition, any words that are associated with that industry. If you're a digital marketing person, it would have digital marketing terms. I call that recruiter bait. And those are what we call keywords. And that is what brings you up in recruiter systems or whatever recruiters are using. And LinkedIn itself has its own search function for recruiters that's going to put you front and center. So again, your photo, your header, and your summary. If I could get people to just do those 3 things, I would be a very happy coach.
Well, and it sounds like even with existing LinkedIn profiles, that if someone just focused on those 3 key elements, they would actually see results that would increase their visibility to recruiters and hiring managers, and perhaps maybe even reviewing it on a regular basis to see, one, if it's still truly accurate or if there's any additions or changes that need to be made.
That's a very good point. And I also tell people you shouldn't wait till you have to look for a job to update your profile. Number one, you should keep it current all the time. Number two, oftentimes people are very worried about their hiring manager, their manager, seeing them update their profile, and they think if I've updated my profile, my manager sees it, my manager is going to know that I am looking for a job. So I say, if you do it all the time, and people on your team get used to seeing you updating it all the time, they're not going to even know when you are out there on the market the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a great tip actually, because if it's so rare, it is noticeable, but if it's on a regular basis. So to that, do you have a cadence in which you would recommend people? Like, is it once a month, once a quarter, maybe every time the time changes, except for Arizona? I don't know.
Change your batteries in your
smoke
detector and change your LinkedIn profile. I think anytime you have this realization that you've added to your toolbox, that there's something new, some new skill, some new experience, just add another bullet. And let me also give you another hint. LinkedIn has no bullets. There's an asterisk, which I love the asterisk, but LinkedIn itself has no bullet function. So I always tell my clients and everyone we work with, we do all of their work in a Word document. We create all of the material. It has the auto correct. You'll be able to see how it looks. And then we go ahead and put a space between each line that is bulleted. So it has lots of nice white, clean space for the eye to rest. And so you have this this title of your job, which, by the way, should also be capitalized. I also do not believe in months and including months because it makes it a little bit more messy. But I also believe that if you are new to the job market, in other words, you're fresh out of college and you've done internships, months are probably necessary because internships are oftentimes abbreviated period of time, not a whole year. And then have a little blurb that identifies what your overall job the specifics of your, not the specifics, but the overall function of your job, and then the bullets underneath that you cut and pasted from Word.
That's great. And I think people would just normally go into the tool within LinkedIn, right? And it sounds like the formatting opportunities there are a little bit limited. But if you have the opportunity to differentiate the way that your profile is formatted, and all it takes is just using one additional application, then it'll be worth that investment in time.
Absolutely.
That's great.
So one last thing I want to tell our listeners, our wonderful listeners, is that the more complete your profile is, the better. And people ask me all the time, should I just cut and paste my entire resume into your profile? The last 10 years are the most critical years, unless 15 years ago you did something that you now want to do again. And you want to showcase that because you don't want people to think you're not interested in doing whatever that was 15 years ago. Yep. So having a thoroughly filled in profile is going to really help. And there's a cute tool in LinkedIn if you go to the edit function of LinkedIn and you're editing your profile, off to the right will be this circle and it fills up as you get better. Your profile gets better and better and better until you're an all-star. Whew, an all-star. And so I always tell people, if you want to optimize your profile, just follow how filled up that circle is. Also, let me say that LinkedIn prompts you. When you sign in to update your profile, it will ask you a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, even I, who has probably more profile than needs to be, get questions from LinkedIn like, when you worked at this, did you do that? And I just go, that was 20 years ago. I'm dating myself. That was 20 years ago. I don't want to even talk about that. You can just X out of it. But it does prompt you. So the more thorough your profile is, the better.
Great. That's great. And I think because people may be worried about putting too much information in there. And when you're a little bit more seasoned in your career, it's hard to gauge how far you go back. So that's great. So it sounds like the key is to focus on the last 10 years, but to make sure that you include anything 10 plus years down the road if it's going to assist you with maybe re-engaging with a skill set or transitioning back into a role that you'd done previously.
Exactly. I had a client of mine who we went back 10 years. And her resume went back farther. And she went into interview at a local large book-selling online retailer, and they went back to her resume. I had prepped her for the interview, and they went back to the resume, and they said, "Oh, you did this thing 15 years ago," which we did not prep for. So just be aware that if there are people who are interested in something you did 15 years ago, just be prepared to talk about it. But
Yeah.
that's not LinkedIn specific. That's just all
Yeah,
interviewing.
regardless of what profile, whether it be your resume. Yeah,
Exactly.
That's great. So that ties in greatly to the next question is, if you have this kind of continuity with your roles, regardless of whether you stay within the same company or if you go to different companies, say someone has, over the course of 10 to 15 years, have similar skills and experience, how do you make sure that there isn't this repetitiveness, that it doesn't seem like what you're doing is taking your kind of a template of what you did at one company and applying it to all of them, even though that may be true, right? And that perhaps your responsibilities were greater, or you take on, employees or whatever. But how do you make sure that it doesn't become this white noise?
That's a great question, because I've had many clients who have done the same job over and over and over again. I think what the perspective you should always have is, how do I freshen up? How do I get more content that engages the reader? And honestly, I'll give you a really easy hint. Just go out and look at job descriptions and job postings, because oftentimes you'll read job postings and go, I do that, but I just don't say it that way. So I'll give you a kind of a funny story. When my kids were younger and I needed to figure out what to make for dinner, I would go down the frozen food aisle for ideas because they're already pre-made. It wasn't that I bought the frozen foods. I went, oh, I should make Swedish meatballs. It gives me ideas. The same thing is true of going out and looking at job descriptions. Go out and look at job descriptions. Don't recreate the wheel. Look at those descriptions and see if you can leverage those for your own profile.
Yep. No, that's a great tip.
Yeah, don't reinvent the wheel, sister. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, Laura, one of the interesting questions that sometimes we've heard over coffee conversations with job searchers or just people within our network is, I decided to take some time off for whatever reason. Perhaps it's taking the summer off to spend more time with family, or just I've been in this industry for so long, I just need to take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to message a gap in your profile or your resume, but in this instance, specifically with your LinkedIn profile, that says to the hiring community, I'm available, I'm engaged. Mm-hmm. I took a step aside for a short or however long to travel, but please don't discount me because I decided to take care of what I needed to do.
That question is asked so many times, mostly of people who have stayed home to raise families, where there is a very significant gap. The first thing I'm going to say right off the bat is, recruiters and hiring managers only care about what you can do for them. So never be apologetic about that gap. It's okay if there's a gap. If there is a gap and you've done a lot of volunteering or a lot of community work, a lot of work with your child's school, whatever it might be, definitely put that into that volunteering. But really play up your previous experience by going back, looking at past reviews, looking at job descriptions, remembering what made you such a rock star, and put that into your profile. And again, don't be apologetic. Now, if you took off a very short period of time, which many of my clients have because of this thing called burnout, then what I suggest is putting some content out there that engages and catches someone's eye. So I'll give you an example. We had a client who took some time off to travel throughout Africa. So I made him put pictures of Africa, which, by the way, you can put any media, just about any media you want on LinkedIn, and you should. And so there are pictures of Africa and African animals. It's so engaging. And it just says 6-month travels through Africa.
Wow.
And as a recruiter, someone who still does recruiting, I went, okay, that is so much more interesting to look at than just about any profile that I can see. So don't be afraid and don't be apologetic of it and don't try and cover it up. It is what it is. As long as you are doing the work that someone needs you to do to solve for X and to help them, that's the most important thing, that you are articulating that message very clearly.
And it sounds like it could be used, obviously you want to approach it in a very positive manner, but it could be used as a key differentiator between you and another 10 profiles that they're going to be coming across today.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah,
absolutely.
So we're actually going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're actually going to talk about, and you had mentioned this earlier, Lora, but we're going to take a look at how we can explore new opportunities without maybe announcing it to the world.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
We're here with Lora Poepping of Plum Coaching and Consulting out of Seattle, Washington. And we did a quick intro before we went to break, Lora, about how folks could go ahead and indicate to potential employees or recruiters when they might be looking for an opportunity without actually making this huge announcement to the world. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, privacy and the privacy settings are one of the most unused or unknown about aspects of LinkedIn. So if you are exploring new opportunities, the first thing that I would do is go what I call under the Harry Potter cloak of invisibility. It's where you go to, if you go to this very small icon of yourself in the upper right-hand corner of LinkedIn, you'll see a little photo of yourself or a little icon of a person. And you click on that because there are a lot of hidden things on LinkedIn. And then you go down to privacy and settings and click on that, or manage privacy and settings. It'll take you to sort of a dashboard page. And in the middle, it says privacy. Underneath the privacy, it says see what you can actually manage what others see when you look at their profile. And there's 3 options. One is to be completely transparent, and it's Lora Poepping, and it's Plum Job Search Coaching. The second one I'm not even going to talk about because it's useless. And the third one, I'm not even going to bore your readers with it. And the third one is remain anonymous. When you are out looking for hiring managers or looking for people who might be in your industry or at companies that are of interest to you, and you don't want them to necessarily look at your profile right away, because if you look at someone's profile, oftentimes they'll look back at you.
Right.
It's kind of like knocking on their door. So they open it. And before they open it, you want to just kind of creep around a little bit. So take a look at other people's profiles, but under this Harry Potter cloak of invisibility. I hope that's not trademarked. I hope I can use that. Then the other thing is, when you go to profile, edit my profile, there will be this large button on the right-hand side. You want to switch that button to no. And the reason is, as you make changes to your profile, you don't want every period or comma that's been added to be broadcast to everyone in your network. So one of the very first things I do with clients when I sit down with them to talk about their profile is we switch that button to no. So that is how you start it off. If you want to go out and let recruiters know you're interested, there's actually a fairly new function of LinkedIn where under privacy, and you can Bing or Google this, you can look for how do I let recruiters know I'm interested. And there is a newer button that you can go to within the settings of your profile that you switch to I'm interested. And that way you'll appear to recruiters first. The interesting thing about this button, this newer button, is that it will prevent people from your own company knowing. It's not 100% guaranteed, but it is a newer function.
Interesting. So if you do work for a larger company, and there are recruiters from that company, scouring LinkedIn for great candidates, you're actually not going to pull up in their search results.
Right.
So there's an opportunity for you to continue to let the external community know that you're available, but not necessarily the internal.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's
One thing
great.
I do want to add is that if you do put yourself in this kind of privacy setting where you're anonymous and you start reaching out to people, it's a better idea when you are at that point to go back and be completely transparent.
Okay.
So choose that very top button.
Yep. No, that's great.
I don't want to leave anyone to believe that you can stay anonymous all the time.
And there are times when it is the right time to be anonymous, and then when you're ready to actually take that step to remove yourself from that.
And that applies to almost so
Everything.
many parts of life.
Absolutely. So along the lines of letting the world know when you're ready that you are open to new opportunities, what is the best way to let potential employers know, both from an assertive perspective to reach out, but also if you're on vacation for a couple of weeks and you're not as active on LinkedIn, but you want to make sure that during that 2-week period there are potential employees, because sometimes it does come all down to timing, right? If a new role comes up and you just happen to be out of, off in, a foreign country.
Bora.
Yes, or on an African safari.
Yes.
But that it works for you, even though you may not be actively on it every single day. What's the best way?
Well, number one, absolutely, is that you have to have a robust profile. That will just generate interest. Recruiters, and I still do recruiting, we are a little impatient. For the right person, we're willing to wait. So if you're off in the African jungle or on a safari, that doesn't mean that someone isn't going to be interested in you later on. But you should have this very strong profile that it does attract attention. And this is a great segue into one other comment I wanted to make, which is recruiters use LinkedIn as their primary tool. And even when I was a recruiter at Microsoft with a giant database of candidates, I oftentimes didn't even use that database. I would go out and direct source candidates from LinkedIn. And if they didn't have a picture, didn't have a header, didn't have a summary, and didn't really articulate what they did, I would skim right over them. So that's why it's really important to have that really strong
And so
profile.
that'll be the key differentiator that makes you pop out
Exactly.
to those recruiters.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So let's talk about how you differentiate yourself along those same lines, not only in your profile, but is it a requirement to be published on LinkedIn? Like, how do you, looking for those key differentiators without, dressing up in a creepy clown suit or something, but making sure that you're making your profile work for you, but that it obviously takes some work. So maybe if someone's not confident in writing, or is it a requirement to write an article to be published on LinkedIn, or are other ways that you can engage on a proactive nature that continues to keep you kind of active within the community?
Sure. Well, almost every morning I start with reading my feed, which is, if you're familiar with Facebook, is that all the information that keeps coming up about your friends. LinkedIn has the same thing, but it's really professionally focused in nature. And I really encourage your listeners to stay completely professional on LinkedIn and not put pictures of their pets or their children on LinkedIn. That's what Facebook and other social media avenues are for. But what I will say is that feed and reading that feed and then actually posting to that feed, because you can do that right at the top, is a really great way to get some attention. The other thing that's really important is the more groups that you belong to, the more people you're connected to, the more companies you follow, the richer and more robust your feed. So going to your feed and reading through that and weighing in on things is really valuable. As far as your profile, I really encourage all of my clients to include media and photos and links on their LinkedIn profile. So perhaps their last role was with the Woodland Park Zoo, and they were actually able to get some press for that in their job. I would want them to go out, find a link to whatever that media is, and actually put it underneath that profile. The more photos and content on your LinkedIn profile, the more you're going to show up as someone who's staying current, someone who really understands the value of putting a message out there.
That's great. And because it seems like people might be a little bit intimidated by that, but at the same time, there is a way to be able to, and certainly if it's a part of your job, that you should be able to find some additional mediums to be able to share with folks. And if it's connected to your profile, it's a one-stop shop in order for those recruiters to find you and learn more about you.
And there is a great tool on LinkedIn to write blogs, and I do use it, but I love to write. However, not all the links or not all of the icons on my LinkedIn profile are things that I've written. I will find a thought leader, whether it be in job search, whether it be in recruiting, and I will post some things to my LinkedIn profile, and then I'll go to the feed and tell the person who wrote it and call them out and say, I found this to be so compelling that I've shared it on my own personal profile.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that might be a great introduction for people to engage directly with folks and expand their network, but also get into the practice of even posting a comment or giving a shout out to another person that's maybe contributed the article.
And
That's
I know
awesome.
the first time is scary, but there is a lot of content and that feed goes by really quickly. So don't be intimidated by it.
That's awesome. That's great. So we've touched on a couple of do's and don'ts. So let's wrap this up into what are the 3 biggest mistakes that you see folks do on LinkedIn?
Bad photo. Number 1, you can tell that's top of mind for me because I've seen so many bad photos. So that would be the first. The second is a lack of quality information about their role. So I might see a job title, but not see any content, not see any bullets. And by the way, I'm going to really drive the point home. Use bullets in your LinkedIn, not paragraphs. And then probably a lack of any following of companies or industries or groups, because that just tells me they've had a LinkedIn profile probably for a number of years. They're not really staying current. They're not really putting themselves out there. So I would put that out there too. And I also want to add, I know people are intimidated by putting media on their profile. There is a little box next to your job title that if you click on it, you can add media. Or there's also at the bottom, it says add video, link, article, white paper, all of those at the bottom.
Correct.
You just click on that. You can add a link really quickly. It's not that difficult. And I also look for articles or media that have a photo. Sometimes, actually, even on my own profile right now, there's one without a photo, and I need to change that. And by the way, I am the cobbler's child. My own profile needs a little bit of work.
Well, and that's great. And it does sound like they are easy tools to be able to engage with, and ones that you can update on a regular basis, whether add or remove. It's no longer relevant to, maybe it was 15 years ago. Although I've been on LinkedIn for a while. I don't know if it's been 15 years yet. I don't know that they've been around for 15 years.
I don't want to count up the years, actually. What year was it founded?
Right. So stepping away from the 3 biggest mistakes, what are the 3 things that people could take action on today? And it sounds like it's update the photo. It's make sure that you have the bullet points. So is there anything else beyond the opposite of the mistakes that you just discussed that you think that people could just go home tonight after work and go ahead and make those small changes and hopefully bubble up to the top of a recruiter's list?
Absolutely making those 3 small changes, the header, the photo, and you may not have a photo right away. But that content, you can start gathering the content. The easiest thing to do is to sit down, maybe with a glass of wine, and start bulleting out all the things that you do. But don't make it a laundry list. Make sure that you're telling stories of success. Just like your resume should not just be a laundry list. It should really give me a visual about what you've done that made a difference. Why should I engage with you? Why should I hire you if you're not telling me what successes you've had? So metrics are great. Bullets that really summarize something that you've done, that really shows you to stand out from other people. All of those things are things you could start putting together in a document, a simple Word document or Google Doc, that you're really starting to accumulate information about yourself and be able to articulate that in your profile. That would be the low-hanging fruit of start.
That's great. And would it be both those measured successes as well as maybe the soft skills as well? Like, because I think in relation to especially service-related roles, like how do you articulate, if it's something didn't have a solid metric behind it, but you improved the experience for your client or your customer, how making sure that it's articulated that you're able to focus in on the soft skills as well as those hard measured skills as well.
Well, anyone out there who's HR knows that there's not a lot of metric in HR.
Yes.
It's moving in that direction, but it isn't quite there yet. And measurement of ROI in HR is really difficult. So I absolutely understand. But again, if you look through the lens of what difference did it make that I was this HR person? What difference did it make that I was a therapist? What difference did it make that I was a child psychologist at a school? What was the differentiator between me? I worked with students who were in some sort of challenging scenario and was able to get them extra support, or something that really showcases your success is the most important thing. Bring me into the story when I read through those bullets.
That's great. That's great. So before we get into this last segment, Lora, I wanted to ask if there was anything else that you wanted to share with listeners today. Obviously, we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg, right. And we've kind of joked that we could sit here for another 6 hours and chat about this
you
kind
and
of
I
stuff.
Specifically, yes.
Yes, exactly. But as we round things up, we just want to make sure that our listeners are able to have an action item or two, or just a nugget that they can go with. So we've covered a lot of fantastic things today, but is there anything else that you wanted to share?
I think the most important thing for your listeners to note is that recruiters and hiring managers use LinkedIn to validate you. So when people reach out, when people hear about me as a coach, or about Plum, my firm, and my awesome coaches that I love on Team Plum, the very first thing that they typically do, other than getting the information from their friend, is that they will oftentimes go to our website to make sure we're legit. Mm-hmm. Or they might go to Lora's or my personal LinkedIn page just to see what I'm saying about myself. Most of us do not have a website. LinkedIn is the most optimal site to showcase your professional successes. And if you don't leverage that, then just go buy yourself a cup of coffee and figure out what else you want to do with your life.
It's a missed opportunity.
It absolutely.
Yep. Great. You're almost leaving money on the table at that point too, right? Because there might be an amazing opportunity that come by, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and we've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask Lora that we ask each of our guests, and this is kind of a lighthearted approach, but I think it might give us some really good insight. So we'll be back in a minute. So as I mentioned, we just got a few questions for Lora that we ask each of our guests, and definitely a fun segment and one that has provided great insight for us, not only about our guests, but these are all kind of interesting questions that we should be asking ourselves and just friends, family, and folks within our network. So, what was your first job, Lora?
So my first job is so interesting, I have to say. I went to graduate school at Indiana University, go Hoosiers, and while I was in graduate school, I was given the opportunity to work to put myself through graduate school. And I do consider this my first job because it truly was a stretch for me. I was the advisor to the 30-plus fraternities at Indiana University.
Wow.
Over 2,000 fraternity guys. That was my purview. And I was the advisor to not only the fraternities, but the Interfraternity Council. Yes, there is such a thing. And I advised them and acted as their sounding board. And my manager, who is now the president of a university, was named Vic Boschini. And Vic trusted me to do this very big job. And it was an incredible opportunity to manage people who were pretty close to my own age, and also to be able to articulate to these young men why we would want to behave in a certain way or not behave in a certain way, and having to come across as having authority but yet being very approachable. And I think that first job really set the stage for the rest of my career, and I was so lucky to have a manager who believed in me.
That's fantastic. So I would imagine that as you were advising these young gentlemen of the appropriate behavior, did you think at the time that it would be a skill set that you would be taking with you?
Well, the intent when I first launched my career, and my master's degree is in higher education administration, was that I would always remain on a college university campus. But there were counseling and coaching classes you had to take as part of that master's. So I saw this opportunity as a stepping stone, and I actually did go to work at the American University in Washington, D.C., after I graduated. And I also worked at the Smithsonian. So I had these really great opportunities to stretch or flex those same muscles in the jobs that came after that. Then after I left the American University, I did actually go into HR and recruiting. So there was a big transition there. But again, being a great listener, being very thoughtful about how you answer or address crises. I find myself getting really, really calm in times of crises, and I think because I had the opportunity to work with more than 30 fraternities.
Well, and it's so fantastic to look back, and anyone looking at going into college and potentially even taking on a role like that, to see that, or to know that that was an incredible launching pad for a very full and rich career that has led you down to the path where you are today. That's fantastic.
And I thank the very first manager I had, Vic. He was just incredible.
That's
an incredible
great.
Leader.
So, Laura, what have you read or listened to or even watched recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I watch a lot of Silicon Valley.
Which I've heard is actually good insight into Silicon Valley.
No, I actually think Game of Thrones in Seattle is better. And I ask my team to call me Khaleesi. But that's neither here nor there. No, what I like to do is I follow what's going on, number one, in the Seattle employment community. So I read everything from the Puget Sound Business Journal, Seattle Times Online, GeekWire, just Seattle Magazine. I actually tweet sometimes to Seattle Magazine because I find their content really good. I try and stay up on what's going on in my community, and I encourage your listeners to do the same, especially when they're job searching. But as far as staying up to date in recruiting so that I keep my knife sharpened for my clients who are relying on me for job search, I think that making sure that I'm connected to other recruiters, and that's what I encourage your listeners to do, is if they're in program management, connect with other program managers. If they're in supply chain or logistics, connect to other people or a particular industry. A lot of people working, whether it be a large company or small, put their head down and just do their job. And they think that's enough. But when you job search, if you don't have a really strong list of connections who are invested in you, you will be behind in terms of your job search. So I really encourage you to stay active. I do all the time. I hope that Plum continues forever, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. So it's always good to stay connected to colleagues.
And it could be everything from a quick article that you're reading, whether it be in a magazine or through LinkedIn, through to connecting through virtual networks or in the community to be able to go and seek out other people or people that perhaps you may not actually meet on a regular basis.
Exactly.
Right? That's
so
awesome.
When I was commuting across from Seattle over to Redmond for 13 years, I made it a point that every day on my way home, I would call a different person. And so that I was staying connected to them and just saying, hey, I'm still thinking of you. And I'm really lucky because now after all those years and after all those spans across the bridge, I have been so lucky that many of those people who I reached out to still reach out to me. And I think that engagement, that one-on-one engagement, can never be replaced. I don't care how virtual we make everything. I don't care how many times you use whatever texting. Nothing is better than having a conversation with somebody.
That voice. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely interested in hearing this answer. So you're sitting across having a cup of coffee with your 90-year-old self right now. What would you say to your 90-year-old self?
Aren't you glad you kept going to Zumba?
That's awesome. Well, and so a spin on that would be, what would your 90-year-old self say to you?
Gosh.
Go to Zumba?
Go to Zumba. Get your honey to Zumba. I think my 90-year-old self would say, I'm glad you always thought about other people. I'm glad you made the connection with other people a focal point of your life. And I'm glad you cared so much about seeing people be successful at whatever it is and lent whatever gifts you had to helping them move their lives forward. And good job, Lora.
That's awesome. That's great. So unfortunately, we're out of time. And again, we could sit here all day and chat with you about this. And we definitely want to be able to have you back. But how can folks find Lora Poepping and Plum Coaching and Consulting?
Well, since we're talking about LinkedIn, of course, Lora Poepping, and I assume my name will be spelled out. I have a very unusually spelled name, Lora and then Poepping. It's not popping, folks. It's pepping, as if there's no O. That would be the first way. But also, Plum Coaching and Consulting has a beautiful, if I do say so myself, website. And it actually has everyone on our team on the website. And it gives everyone a chance to look at what services they may need. But those would be the two primary ways that I would find me out there in the world.
Well, and we'll have direct links to your website and a few other things about you and your team at thecareerq.com. So for everyone listening, go ahead and check out the show notes. And this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy
we look forward to having you back and hearing more about Plum and your team. And You're going to be able to get some great nuggets from our conversation with Lora today. Go out, be great, and we'll talk to you guys next time.